The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So we just did our, ideally, monthly memorial for Reverend Master Jiyu. We don't actually manage it every month, but we try because she started this temple, she founded our order, she is the teacher of the older monks and the grand master of the younger monks, so she is our relative. And many of you never met her, some of you did, and yet we all go out there and we all walk around her stupa, as we just did, to express gratitude, because she gave us the ability to be here and practice the Dharma. And she had a lot of influence on a great many people. And so out of gratitude, we make this offering of ourselves to go out and chant scriptures, walk around the stupa, make bows and so on. And it's really nice to do. So thank you for coming with us and doing it. Nobody fell off the stupa, which is always nice. Touch wood, so far it hasn't happened. And we all managed to keep moving. Sometimes everybody's sort of stuck. Nobody moves because they're waiting for the person in front to move. And, but today it was perfect. Very happy. Anyway. So, many of you know her story. Some of you know her story intimately. Some of you just know a little bit. She was an English woman who went to Japan. She was ordained in Malaysia on her way. She went to Japan to study the Dharma with Kedo Chisan Koho Zenji, who was the abbot of one of the big training temples in Japan. He invited her to come, and she took him up on it. He'd come to England on a teaching tour. She had met him, arranged his tours for him, and he said, "You're welcome to come to Japan and train with me." And so she did, which was an unheard of thing to do. At that time, in the early 60s, in Britain, shortly after the war, Japan had been an enemy nation, 15 years, 17 years before, and her friends thought she was bonkers. They said, "What are you doing? You don't want to do this. No, stay at home and meditate here. You don't need to do this." But she had a sense that that was what she needed to do. Anytime I talk about Reverend Master Jiyu, I always end up talking about her faith. She had many wonderful attributes, but her faith was the thing that really stands out. And it's something that we can actually all relate to. We don't all need to go to Japan. We don't all need to do great deeds. But we can practice faith. And we can let that guide us. In Buddhism, faith isn't just belief in a doctrine that somebody's told us, although the doctrine helps us to look in the right direction. But it's deeper than that. It's more being willing to try it out for ourselves. That we come here to hear the Dharma and to practice it is actually an act of faith. Even if we have no idea why we're here, there's a faith that something might help us when you first come. And that willingness to try it out is faith, And then as we go on, the willingness to keep going, even when it gets hard, which does happen, it can get hard, and we keep on practicing the Dharma in faith. It keeps us going. Reverend Master Jiyu went to the East because she had just gone through World War II as a young person. Well, not that long before she had gone through World War II. Her hometown had been heavily bombed. Some of her friends had died. Even as a young person, children or young teenagers had died in the bombing. And she was angry. Why is this happening? This shouldn't be the way. How could this kind of thing happen? Here she was, a young person, and people she didn't know were throwing bombs at her, and her friends were dying. And then after the war was over, life was hard in Britain, probably hard over here too, and she just thought there has to be more to life than this. And she just had this sense, what is there? There has to be somebody who has a smile in his heart. That's how she put it. Because there was so much despair and desolation. Yes, war was over, and it seemed like America and Britain had, in quote, won the war. Well, nobody wins a war. But there was a sense of letdown after the war was over. Jobs were hard to get, and it was just difficult for people. And she just thought, why is life like this? There has to be more than this. There has to be somebody who has joy. And why am I the way I am? But that didn't come till later. First she thought, why is life like this? So she went to study with Kohozenji, who had invited her, thinking, maybe I'll get an answer here. He was somebody who clearly had a smile in his heart. He had peace of heart, and she could recognize that. And that was what she wanted. So she went to the East, gave up her life, spent all her money and borrowed a little to get there. And this was a huge uprooting for her. And it was really hard because the culture was extremely different. She was a woman in a man's temple and a foreigner who'd been an enemy a few years before, So it was hard. And yet she was able to make use of it. And after a while she realized that she'd thought she wanted to know, why is the world the way it is? But really what she needed to know was, why am I the way I am? I myself am capable of cruelty and unkindness and killing and devil. How do I deal with that in myself? And that was what she had really come for, but she didn't realize that right away. But faith in something bigger than just the mundane details of her life. There has to be more than this. That took her to the East. She had already been practicing Buddhism, but it hadn't really given her that joy because she didn't have a teacher. But Kohozenji became her teacher. And although she didn't see him very often, he really helped her. Because every time he told her something, she would take it to heart. She would hear it, she'd listen and think, what does he mean by that? And she'd see what he was trying to tell her, not always directly, but in an oblique way sometimes. That's what I need to do. Right. Because she was willing to learn, willing to be open, and willing to see that there was something she needed to do about herself to bring her peace of heart. It wasn't the world, it was her. The world isn't great, and it's not great now, but to say the least of it. But it was herself she could do something about. She couldn't fix the world, but she could do something about her own anger, hatred, and so on. And this is an enormous act of faith, as I said, against the advice of all her friends. She ups and goes. And she found what she was looking for, and she found a whole lot more besides. She didn't just find out, how do I transform myself? She found something a whole lot bigger. And she writes about it in her diary, The Wild White Goose, which is available up in the Vimalakirti Hall. We come to Buddhist training for seemingly various reasons. We all come because we want something. Either we're pushed into it or we're pulled into it, I think. We're pushed in by suffering. The suffering of life. Things that have happened to us, maybe things we've done, maybe we're having a hard time getting along with other people, maybe somebody in our life has recently died or left us, or we're ill, maybe we have a chronic bad temper, or we're anxious, or something that needs help. Suffering can drive us to Buddhism. So it's not just a bad thing, suffering. I'm a great believer in it. Or, the other way, we may have some little insight or an experience that shows us that there's a whole lot more to life than what I see. there's the great matter. And we think, whoa, what's that? That's the important thing. And we get pulled. And many of us, it's a bit of both. We have suffering, it pushes us in, and that something that we see is bigger, that pulls us. So, first, it is said that when we come to Buddhist training, first we come for ourselves, because we want something. Otherwise, it wouldn't start. Then we train to help others. And finally, we train for the sake of doing the training itself, practicing the Dharma for its own sake, not to get something for ourselves or others, but because it's good to do. We were talking a little bit about this last night. We come because we want something, and eventually we kind of get beyond that, and we just do it because it's good to do. Because as we practice the Dharma, our wanting starts to fade a little bit. It's not so much about me and my stuff and my suffering and my everything and my wanting something nicer and my wanting, It's more, how do I help beings? How do I stop harming beings? We begin to see that what we've done has not been all that great. We might have done a lot of harm. We might not have done a lot, but we can see improvement, room for improvement there. We may have a bit of a temper, or difficulties with people, or just suffering that we don't know how to address. And we begin to learn how to do something about it. And we begin to see that as we train, as we practice the Dharma, it helps other beings as well as ourselves. So it's not just about me, but it's helping others too, helping my family, the people I work with. We see that there's an effect there. And then, as I said, eventually we do it for its own sake, because we can't stop, because we know that we can't turn our back on it, because this is something that really leads to peace of heart. We start to see, too, how we become kinder. Our very difficulties help us. We become more patient. We become more sympathetic. In some ways, things get easier, and in some ways, they can get harder. Sometimes it feels as though we're worse than we were before, because we start to see that we have a bit of a temper, or that we constantly criticize, my God, the critical mind again, I don't believe this, Or we're constantly worrying about stuff. And we may not have even realized that. We start to see this. We think, I was a nice person before, now I'm just a beast. But actually, we're beginning to see what we need to do. And then we can do something about it. Because if we have anger that we're just squashing down, eventually it comes out. Or we may not even realize that we're kind of snipping at people and, not being very nice. And we start to see our critical little thoughts and words and think, I don't want to be like that. I want to change. And we start to change. So as we come to training, if it seems worse at first, do not worry. Keep going. It'll get better. Might take a while. It gets better. Those of us who have been training for a while, it does make us happier and nicer, I think. And there's a peace of heart, because underneath all this stuff, there is something that knows we're on the right track. There's something that knows this is good to do something about ourselves. You actually don't have to be a Buddhist to do this. In any religion, you can do something about yourself and practice it, because they all preach kindness and generosity and faith, actually. But we're Buddhists, so I'm talking about that. And as we continue, we see how we are actually becoming kinder. We are becoming more sympathetic, and there is that underlying peace of heart, because we know we're doing what we need to do. We're doing what actually helps, not only us, but other beings. And this is the practice of faith, part of it. And with all of this, as I said, there's something a whole lot bigger going on. Each of us has that sense that there is something more than just me and my stuff. There is something a whole lot bigger. And sometimes we get a real good look at it, or even a short good look at it. Sometimes we just have a sense of it. But it brings us to the Dharma. It brings us to do something about ourselves, because we see that our best chance of finding it is by seeing through that little self that thinks of everything in terms of me, mine, what I need, what I want, what I don't like, what I don't, to get beyond that and to do what's good. Because actually all of us want to do what's good. Not just what we like, but what is actually good to do. And the more we listen to that, and the more we trust that, the more we can express it, and the more it keeps us on the path. And that's part of the practice of faith. Just trusting that heart that says, this is good to do. And to work on my selfishness and my greed and anger is good to do. To see where I've made mistakes and try and do better. To see where I can change and need to change. And then we start to see how that actually starts to radiate outwards, and it helps others. But we're not just trying to be a saint, but actually just trying to do our modest best with what we have today, right here. The people I work with, making breakfast, whatever it might be, just doing our best. As we continue practicing the Dharma, doing our meditation every day, doing our best to keep to the precepts, we stop expecting something or wanting something. It gradually sort of fades away. So there's less of, well, I want to get something out of this. But how can I give myself to it? To put everything we can into it. And that is joyful. Giving of ourselves brings us joy in whatever way it is. And giving ourselves to the practice, to keeping the precepts, to doing our meditation, giving ourselves to that greater thing, however we choose to express it, that brings joy and peace of heart, because that's what our true being wants to do. And the more we sit still, the more that becomes apparent. And the more it becomes apparent, the more we want to sit still so that we can harmonize with that, act from that, rather than from this little selfish me that wants something. And then when we do act from the little selfish me, we feel much worse than we might have done in the old days, because we think, I don't want to do that. I can do better than that. And we decide, no, I want to keep to the precepts, to train for the sake of the training itself, because that's what's good to do. And this is the practice of faith. Whether things are easy, whether they're hard, to keep on doing it. That which is greater than we are sustains us, embraces us, and embraces everything. All our experience, all everybody else's experience, all the creatures of our lives, and all the thoughts and things that make up our experience. All of it is embraced within that great matter. You call it God, you call it Buddha nature, call it the universe. People have different ways of thinking about it, or experiencing it, or talking about it, and that's just fine. I don't like any of them, to be honest. But because none of them is descriptive, they're all dreadful in some way. But they help. We had to point at. You can't just grunt and point. Say, That doesn't really help, Reverend Master Jiyu found what she was looking for when she went to the East. And as I said, she found a whole lot more. Whole lot more. And when you read her writings or listen to her talks, we get a sense of the richness and the profundity of what she found, the depth and variety of her teachings and writings, and the joy that comes through, and the kindness and wisdom. Oh, please, will nobody rid us of this meddlesome cat? Thank you, thank you. We wore her up when this happened. Thank you, thank you. I take care of this cat. I have to take some responsibility for this little creature. Small cat, big voice. Reading Reverend Master Jiyu's writings and hearing her teachings, you get a sense of that warmth and kindness. She was a big person, physically big, and she had a huge heart and a big vision. She came to the West. She had no intention of starting a monastery, but she started this little meditation group down in the Bay Area, got bigger, needed more space, so okay, let's move out of town. Comes out to Mount Shasta, and somebody tells her about this place, a motel. She says, okay, comes out, okay, we'll buy it. She had no money. This is faith, But she managed to scrape the money together and bought the place and paid off the mortgage eventually and so forth. So we have this. But it had to be a big vision that could do that could come up here, say, we'll take it. This is what we need. And trust that it would work out. That's faith. And it's big. And the bigness of her vision, of her understanding, and of her kindness really come through when, as I said, when you hear her talk or you read her writings, the bigness of her faith and the bigness of that which she lived from. She lived from that heart that knew the great matter, the great thing for which we train. She lived from that and never compromised that. She would treat everyone with kindness, sometimes stern kindness, and sometimes very stern kindness, because she knew that training was hard. She was just nice to us. It wouldn't help us nearly so much as sometimes saying, what the hell are you doing? Or stop it, rather than, oh, poor dear, it'll be all right, None of that. It was much more, you can do better than this, And for that, I'm really grateful. I think all of us who trained with her are really grateful for her stern voice. And she could have a big voice, too. And that kindness that underlay the sternness sometimes, knowing that life is not easy. Training is not easy because you come face to face with yourself. You come face to face with difficulty. How do you live in faith with that? To trust that there's something bigger than my little difficulty or my little imperfections. There is something much greater towards which we turn the heart. And that turning of the heart towards the great matter is what really is the important thing. We keep to the precepts as best we can because that helps us with that. And it helps everybody. We do our meditation as best we can because it helps us to find that and live from it. And when we think we haven't found it, we can live from it anyway. We just trust it. The practice of faith. That's the important thing. That is what she found when she went to the East. Much more than what she was looking for. And that is what she brought back for us. That is why we walk around her stupa and offer gratitude. Now there's still just as much death and cruelty in the world as there was then, maybe more. We see it every day. Plenty of cause for getting angry and despairing and what can we do? But we don't have to do that. We can do something about ourselves. We can turn the heart towards that great matter. And turn the heart towards the Dharma. And towards doing the best we can with the life we have. With the circumstances of our lives. With all the things we deal with. all our difficulties that can and do help us, because if we didn't have difficulties, we wouldn't start. And to use everything, all those things of our lives, as things that can help us. One thing she said, which we often repeat when she was in Japan, Reverend Master, she said, I have to take everything that happens to me as being for my good. And that is what she did. And that's what really turned it around for her. Because everything that happened, she could take and use to the good, and use to help her to find that great matter. And so we can do that. We can use all the circumstances of our lives, whether they're joyful, sorrowful, whether we're sick, we're healthy, young, old, monk, layperson, doesn't matter. Whatever we have, whatever our circumstances, we can use them to help us to find that great matter. We can practice kindness. Any of us can do that. We can practice sympathy. We can do our best to understand where the other person's coming from, and to understand where we're coming from. Why am I like this? Why am I so upset by this thing? Just defensive. I'm just afraid. Okay, let it go. Easy to say, hard to do. But to see to see helps us to do something. If we don't look, we can't see. If we can't see, we can't do anything. To look, to be willing to look, to be willing to change, to be willing to open our heart, turn toward that great matter. That great matter that embraces all of us, all of the things of the world, all the cruelty, wars, craziness, global warming, whatever it is that ails us, it's all embraced within that great matter. And we can use all of it to help us. Do our best with it. Help where we can. And in the meantime, well, not just in the meantime, but for always, to practice faith that that which is greater than our little vision of what's going on, that we can trust, entrust ourselves to in all the conditions of our lives, even when they seem really difficult. There is something that sustains us, something that helps us, that helps all beings, and we just turn the heart toward that. To train for the sake of training, practice for the sake of practice, turn the heart towards that great matter. And that is the practice of faith. And that is why we practice gratitude to Reverend Master Jiyu, who wholly embodied that. And thank you for walking around her stupa today.